This is the first one. This is the inaugural live sort of video form of Keeping the Beacon Lit. Of course, I am your host, A.B. Timothy. I have been writing for 12 years. I am deeply in love with the idea of storytelling, and that is the entire purpose behind this podcast is to bring other creatives on, talk about their own writing journey, talk about what inspired them, and how we may collaboratively inspire those coming up after us. Today, I have with me a friend of the show, Matt, author of Revo, and soon to be published author of a new book that I will let him talk about because I don't want to necessarily give anything away that he doesn't want given away on a podcast. So it'll be fun to talk about that today. The purpose of today's episode, as the title sort of alludes to, is we're going to be discussing food. And as a as an American, it might be ironic for me to discuss food because I am a lover of food, if you will. And but that's not the point. The point is talk about it in the context of storytelling and how, as fantasy writers especially, we can play with our food, so to speak, and talk about the the cultural context in our stories that involve food. Um, Sometimes even something as simple as where a character sits at a table implies a lot about his position in the government. Sometimes the amount of food there is on the table will imply the economic state of the land and many other things. So we will be discussing these things together, and I'm going to let Matt give an introduction, talk a little bit about what he's bringing to the table, if you will. And Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Matthew Linton wrote a book called Revo, Blade of the Shooting Star, released back in November. Have another book which is a prequel. It's set in the same universe, but it's still be considered. It still works as a standalone. It's called Franco, Blade of the Shattered Star. It's going to be coming out probably early spring. Is the tentative plan right now. Um, so yeah, I thought it was interesting when you brought up that topic of food and storytelling, and it got me thinking, and I do think there's a lot of symbolism and like you were saying, status and cultural implications when it comes to food. And I thought it was an interesting chat, and I hope maybe I have some anecdotes I could share that add a little to the conversation.
So yeah, I think what I had said right before we had some technical difficulties, we're going to be kind of talking about not necessarily only our own works, but also how we see food and these ideas being realized in media more broadly. So those we've watched or things we've listened to or books we've read. Introduce yourself. You kind of talked a little bit about Franco. That does sound exciting. Um, but I do want to know just sort of so you talked about Revo on the show plenty, and you know that's what it's for. So thank you for doing that. However, with Franco, obviously the first question is sort of standardized. What inspired you to write Franco? Like, what is the beating heart behind that? Is it just you wanted a prequel for Revo, or is there something more?
So yeah, I was not intending on doing anything in I guess if you want to call it the Revo verse or whatever. The Revo was and it still is. It's a standalone novel, and I had actually already finished it. I had some issues with my first editor. I don't know if you're familiar with that whole drama, but it was something that lingered on for months and months and months and months,
Hmm.
and kind of gave me time to think. And I had actually written pretty much finished the entire first draft of Franco while I was still waiting on my editor. And as far as what might have inspired it is I had finished Revo's story. I kind of found myself missing the characters, and was just kind of thinking about it. I'm like, I almost wonder if there's some more to be told about this. And I'd actually some late things I did to Revo. Like one of the last things I did is I added a couple interludes, some lengthier flashbacks, and it really added a lot to the story. And I was like, well, I wonder if I could build on that a little bit more because those flashbacks heavily featured his parents. And I'm like, well, I wonder what his parents' backstory could be. You know, being the writer of Revo, I had a vague idea that Revo's dad, who he's called Frank in the Revo um, book, which is actually that's actually a shout out to L. Frank Baum, who I don't know if I've said this before or not, but I actually grew up in the same hometown as L. Frank Baum. I grew up in his hometown, so that was kind of a shout out to him when I did that. But you know, Frank seemed like kind of a plain name for a fantasy hero. So when I did his story, I just kind of wrote it in that, well, when he was a boy, he was called Franco, and then changed his name to Frank when he became an adult, just to make that a little more interesting. And even in Revo's story, Frank or Franco is said to have been an old soldier, a very much a celebrated and accomplished soldier when he was younger, and he is deceased in the Revo story, so we only are exposed to him in flashbacks. Um, so yeah, I just was like, you know what? I think his parents and his mother too, who's Gwen, called Gwendolyn in the Franco story. She's featured in those flashbacks as well, and she's got some interesting characteristics to herself as well. And I was like, I think that's a story that can be explored there. And when I started writing Franco, I wasn't thinking per se a prequel novel. I was just it was kind of like a creative outlet. I just wanted to get those words on paper and see how it went. I was thinking maybe short story, and it turned into its own story. I think it came in at around 75,000 words ish, um, which is a short novel, but it's you know, definitely not a short story, and or a novella even. So it kind of turned into something of its own.
Yeah, I mean is that's a good way to talk about it, just as a creative outlet. It's good that you chose to continue the world because as the author, you have total creative freedom and you're able to decide these different questions. And with these interludes, I would imagine when someone is done reading your book, they have questions about Frank and who
Mhm.
these characters are. And so it could be quite exciting for a reader of yours to realize, oh, there's a book coming out about this character who was a total mystery before. Fun.
Yeah.
It would almost be for like a Wheel of Time fan. It would be almost the same if Robert Jordan, rest his soul, was still alive today and came out with a prequel novel or even a prequel trilogy about Rand al'Thor's father, Ham al'Thor, and that would because he's a very mysterious character. We get some implications of what he did during the war and all these things throughout the series, but then to have an actual chronologue of what he did and who he was in that time, that would be really cool. And so I'm excited for your readers. You know, don't go and die before you're done editing it. That way you can actually publish it and get it out there. Yeah, that's awesome. So the first question, revolving around the topic of today's episode, is for your world. So the broader world now that you've created with both Revo and Franco, what role, if any, does food or like we talked about the cultural norms around food play in the story? Are there certain norms with like campfires or at a lord's table or these things? So, you have anything there that you can relate with your own work?
So anytime food is discussed, or most times, and in both their stories, they spend a lot of time out in the wild, in the wilderness. The world, Wyverly is the name of that world, and it's loosely based on the town I grew up in upstate New York, and you know, a lot of woods and hills and things like that. So me and my friends would often play out there. So that's where they spend a lot of their time. So a lot of the food they eat would be wild game, fish and wild game. Um, and in Franco's story, he and Franco and his father, which would be Revo's grandfather, were extremely poor. They were just kind of transients. They called themselves traveling merchants, but you know, they were just very poor, didn't have a place to live or anything like that. So they pretty much relied on wild game, nuts and berries, things like that. There is a section going back to Revo's world. It's featured actually in the interludes. Um, there's a yearly festival which kind of loosely resembles Christmas, and from there, there's a a larger town near the very small town that Revo grew up in, and that's one thing that's mentioned is that Revo, when he's having his flashback, remembering it, that's one thing that was distinct is he remembered the smell of all the different, spiced meats and everything like that from all over the land that they'd bring in as part of their yearly celebration. So the food there was much more in line with, with celebrating that yearly holiday um, that they would have, and that as far as any kind of deeper symbolism, not really. There is a part where Revo he had not eaten in quite a long time, and he had his first kind of home cooked meal in a long time. It was just as simplistic. It was sausage and eggs and all that, but it had been food. It was just homemade sausage and eggs, but it's been stuff that he'd been craving because he hadn't had sit down food like that in so long. Even though it's just real simple food. Now, interestingly, there is in Franco's story. I'm sorry to keep bouncing between stories, but they're set in the same world, so it's
No
okay, right?
worries. Yeah.
Um, something I'd kind of written in. Again, it's not necessarily symbolic, but Franco has an encounter. There's a really mysterious creature that kind of lurks around the forest during Franco's lifetime, and kind of ambiguous as far as what this creature's intentions are towards Franco. And there is a confrontation where he just goes to pick some berries, and he finds these berries that called he thinks they're called gold berries. They're just these yellow golden colored berries that you can eat. He picks them, and he gets kind of jumped by this creature, and the creature takes the berries from him, and he finds out that those berries he picked were not gold berries. They were what I called pyro berries, which I got that from what's that fake gold? It's called pyromite or something like that, and that's just
Hmm.
where I got it from. But it's so they have these fake berries that are called pyro berries, which are not gold berries, and they'll make you sick if you eat them. And it kind of was an opportunity to build some little bit of depth to this creature that was we thought maybe was a little malicious, but ended up you know whether that was their intention or not, they actually did kind of help Franco out by jumping him and stealing those berries from him, which he found out were later were poisonous.
Right. I think that's something that now that you've explained so many of these little instances, it's kind of interesting how little we think of food in a setting, but then when we actually start to think about it, it is there. It is sort of sort of a through line of because we're humans, right? Humans need food to subsist, and so we we sometimes will write things naturally into our stories that we don't think much of. I'm going
Yeah,
through the edits on my debut novel right now, The Shards of Arthur's Shield, and there were several scenes that I had that kind of moment where I'm like, did I or did I write this? Like, do I actually recall writing this? Because it's sort of a small, minute detail that it's like, oh, yeah, okay, that's an important detail to make it feel more human and more natural. Without that kind of thing, it might flow better or it might, you know, read faster, but it wouldn't sound as human. And
yeah,
I think in the world of the Britons that I've created for the Shards of Arthur's Shield, food plays a role in the area of culture and social hierarchy. The one actual scene that we have of people eating is actually it's not really all that culturally relevant. But the second scene, there are two. Now that I'm thinking about it. The second scene is one where they're in a barracks mess hall, and it's just sort of every man for himself. It's a total upturning of being seated around a lord's table where there's a set order of things. There's the king sits at the head chair, the lord sits next to him, and it's sort of there's this sort of political game that's being played even with the seating of the table. In the mess hall, all of that's upended. Even though there's lords there because they're there for the tournament of swords. There's lords there. There's poor people there. There's middle class sort of people. There's tradesmen who are there to fight in the tournament. But everyone's just kind of mixed in this big group because they're all there on a level playing field, politically speaking. No one is given an advantage because their kingdom or their county has more profit or something. And so it's something that the character gets to see, and also realize that, oh, these nobles are humans too. They might act all high and mighty, they might act all better than you, but in reality, they're still just humans. They have to eat too. So that's fun to do. And there's a smaller detail. It's not about food directly, but it kind of involves food. The Thomas comes from a farming family, and in his city or town of Alnwick, there's a cultural tradition where when the men of the city or town go off to fight in a war, they give a small pendant to their family of their trade. So when a farmer goes off to war, he gives his wife and children a pendant of a scythe to remember their father is away, and it's sort of an oath saying that they will return again to take up a nobler trade. There's another character who, even though his family has moved on to smith work, they're blacksmiths now. His family has a pendant of a lumberjack's axe because when this cultural tradition was established, their family were lumberjacks. But now they've moved on, but they keep the tradition of the axe pendant. And so Thomas, even though Thomas is moving on from being a farmer to ingratiating himself into higher society, he'll likely continue the tradition and have the pendant of the farmer's scythe, despite him now being someone of much more renown than a mere farmer. And so that, again, not directly related to food, but farming is where we get our food, and so there is some relationship there. Um, yeah, so that's sort of where I'm coming out with that. The next question for you, Matt, only one here. Um, so going throughout history, I've kind of talked about it a little bit. There's the seating arrangements at the Lord's table, all these sorts of things. There's always, almost always in culture, food-based rituals that humans partake in. And looking throughout history and seeing all these food-based rituals, how have those things come up or maybe even purposely been avoided in your stories? Like even like the ritual of like in Christian Americans, we have of praying over our food. Thanking God for our provisions is a cultural ritual that we do. And so maybe something similar comes up in the book, or maybe you thought it could, but then didn't realize it wouldn't ebb well with the story, so you kind of avoided it, you sidestepped it. What's your perspective there?
Yeah, so it goes back to the that yearly holiday that they have that's featured in those interludes. That's actually what there's two interludes. There's a part one and part two, and they both surround this yearly holiday called the Festival of Celestial Lights.
Hmm.
And yeah, food is a big part of it. It starts out Revo was a little boy, and he wakes up to the smell of his mother's cooking. That's one of the things. Everybody contributes something to this big festival, and she was going around cooking, and that was because I've heard before that the sense of smell is the one that's closest tied to memory or something like that. And so I wanted to make sure I hit on that, and it was the smell of the aroma of the different meats and pastries or whatever she was cooking, um, that really kind of burned into his memory during that time. So that's as far as any cultural norms around that, that's not really discussed, but I guess it's kind of loosely implied that hey, this one time a year, people do kind of just go all out when it comes to food. They really, they'll gorge themselves to eat food that they don't normally eat
Hmm.
during this time. Which made me think of something, which is slightly off topic, but I um, I was listening to some missionaries one time talking, and they had gone over to I don't remember what nation it was. It was over in the former Soviet Union. I don't know if it was Uzbekistan or wherever it was, or Moldova. But when they went there, their host family had some meat for them to eat. And they later found out that that family like never cooks meat. They just heard the Americans were coming over and thought that Americans were expecting meat, so they went and bought it and served it to them, even though they know that's not something they normally don't, I guess, not don't eat regularly. Something that we kind of take for granted here. You know, we probably have meat with every meal just about. Um, but I guess over there in that particular nation was something that was a little more scarce, maybe a little more expensive to get a hold of. And they kind of felt that missionary was telling me they kind of felt guilty about it, that these people had to go out all out like that just to accommodate what was normal for the American in that case. So I know a little bit of a tangent, but I just thought that was interesting. The
Yeah,
different expectations of different cultures.
and exactly. Then that's kind of what I was getting at, different areas, and also that kind of weaves back into what I was talking about earlier, how the scarcity or the plumpness of a table can infer a lot of things about a culture. Like being a former Soviet Union country, they probably didn't eat meat, not out of, or it might have been a taste thing, but I can't imagine it being for at least not for everyone. For some people, maybe they just don't like meat, whatever. But for a lot of people, I imagine it was because they didn't have access to it. Like their rations didn't give them very much
Yeah.
meat, and so that was partially because of the food scarcity problems that persisted in the Soviet Union. And you know, and I've been watching the Pendragon Cycle on the Daily Wire Plus recently, and they talk about um there's a scene in episode 4 where Merlin is discussing with a king uh the fact that the provisions are scarce even at the king's table. So that means the king eats good because he's the king and he does. But Merlin was able to tell that even there was some corners being cut and some scarcity being shown, even if maybe we as the viewers couldn't see it because we don't have the cultural context. In America, the classic thing is you're eating if you're really down on your luck, you're eating ramen, which doesn't have meat in it usually, and or you're eating um beans and rice.
Beans and rice.
Beans, yeah,
Yeah, beans and rice.
beans give you protein, a little bit of protein, and rice gives you a bunch of carbs to fill you up. And so there's no meat in that. And so you can tell by someone's table where they're at or how they're doing financially. And that involves a culture. Right now, in some poorer parts of America, unfortunately, or in other first world countries, eggs might be scarcer than they otherwise would be because people talk about all the time how egg prices are going up. And so, as writers, we have the opportunity to, in our work, in our worlds, bring these things along to show the humanity of our people. And also, something interesting that you can do with food is to show the similarities between classes or castes, I guess. So if you have a character, for example, who eats a meal at his, you know, poorer or more pauperish house, there's certain dishes. Maybe he has bread, maybe he has a little bit of meat, and there's some cheese involved. And then when he goes to the king's table, well, would you look at that? There's bread, there's meat, there's cheese. So it sort of equalizes these characters in the minds potentially of the characters themselves, because a lot of people think when they think with affluence comes crazy weird things. And sometimes it does. Sometimes rich people have weird tastes, but a lot of times they're like us. They're like the average people, just with more money. And that's something interesting you can do with food. In the Shards of Arthur's Shield, the book I'm writing, the that is kind of what happens. Not directly, and it's sort of one of those things that you can kind of have to infer. And it's, as someone who's studying to become an academic of English, one of the things you do in academia, especially with literature, is you look at the minute details and you extrapolate as to what that could imply. for the story, and why certain decisions were made. And so this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but for this story, there's that mess hall scene that I already mentioned, and then there's a scene earlier in the book where he eats a regular dinner with his family, who are not the wealthiest, and um, it allows the reader to infer certain things, like, oh, well, they have stew. Okay, well, stew is usually a less to do dish, and they have bread. So okay, but they have bread. Some people wouldn't even have bread, and
Yeah.
so that means they're of a certain class. And so there's it's really it's kind of minute, but again, it wouldn't feel human almost without it. Uh, there's sometimes, like in war movies, they'll have a scene where the soldiers complain about their rations. Is it really important to the story? Does it actually add anything to the context of the war that's going on or the battle they're fighting? Probably not. But it humanizes these people. It makes you as the reader or as the audience member endear yourself to them, because they're like, oh, well, they also have taste buds. That's crazy. I didn't think about they. Oh, these characters from a different world actually have taste buds. Who would have thought? But in reality, we're all human. Everybody has taste buds. Doesn't matter if you're, well, I mean, I guess maybe some weirdo transhumans have cut their taste buds off, but for the most part, generally speaking, um,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you were talking about bread. That is one thing I do a few times, especially in Franco's story, is that they have to travel through these kind of dangerous forests, and there's known for being bandits that go there. And one thing they try to do to throw off these bandits is they try to hide any of their valuables, except for they have some stale bread, so that when the bandits come to get them, they see all they've got. Oh, all you've got here is some stale bread, and then think they don't have anything, and therefore let them go. Was the hope. So anyway, I thought of that when you were mentioning bread. Is that, well, yeah, maybe the king's table does have bread. Was it stale bread or is it the fresh bread? Because the king's table gets the fresh bread, then the lower tables they get maybe the staler bread.
right, like oh, hey, there's another scene. In there's a scene where the love interest of Thomas, her name's Alice, sort of gives Thomas her her backstory, the sort of the origin story of the character. And part of that is she has to attend these high society parties that she hates, but because she's a princess, she's forced to be there and make an appearance to keep up appearances. And what she'll do is she'll show up, she'll fulfill her duties, she'll go on 5 dances or something with the nobles that are there because it's expected of her, and then she'll go and do the alms with the servants. So usually the something that would happen in medieval times. This is something I'm vaguely remembering and sort of using it in my book implicitly. The nobility, to give back when they would have these parties, they would give their scraps and their leftovers to the poor, because they're like, well, there's no point in throwing them away. Like if there's still some bread left, or if there's still something left, we can just give it away, even dirtier things. And so what happens in that scene is someone tips a bowl of grapes and they spill all over the floor. And so none of the nobles would touch them because, oh, they've touched the floor. They're bad now. They're not worth our time. And so Alice, the princess, she goes and she helps the servants collect them and takes that as her opportunity to get out and to go and do alms for the poor. And she doesn't want to be there, and so she'll go and do something more virtuous, and that's involving food. If they didn't eat at these parties, there wouldn't be that opportunity for her to give back to the poor and to do a good thing and to show her strength of character. And that's something that you, dear listener, should take into account for your world. Um, if you're writing something like a dystopian rebellion story, like the Hunger Games, well, it's called the Hunger Games. And a huge part of that is food. Like, why do the bowls in District 12 look so much fuller than the bowls in District 1 at the reaping? That's because as Collins explains in the story, the more times you put your name in the bowl, the more rations you get from the government to help feed your family. And so, because food is really important, because you need that to survive, kids will put their names in, like more impoverished children will put their names in more and more times to help subsidize their families' uh, persistence for the year. And again, if we didn't eat, or if Collins hadn't really thought of the humanity of needing food, then we wouldn't have that little detail in the Hunger Games series. And I could go on and
Yeah,
on with,
it's such an interesting detail too. Yeah.
yeah, and I like you could go on, and especially because we see with Katniss in particular, after her father died, she had to ramp up how many times her name was going on the bowl because her father was their main source of income, and their mother kind of clocked out, which is unfortunate, but it's very human. The and also that the discord between District 12 living and Capital living made the Capital people all the less human for their insanity. It felt like, as Katniss sort of saw it, they to eat more, they would go to the balcony or the garden or whatever and throw up so they can go back and gorge on more food. That was totally inhuman to someone like Katniss. Whereas
Yeah, it's very American. We'll be at a restaurant. We'll see a dessert come out, and we'll wish we were more hungry so we could eat more.
it's true. So that's but the inverse is sometimes true too. The capital people, the citizens of the capital, wouldn't see the districts as proper humans. They would see them as not. I don't think pets is the right word, but you know things for their own entertainment, because they
Yeah,
like seeing them struggle. They like seeing them fight in the arenas and starve and whatever. And
yeah,
to them it was funny to watch these poor district contestants come and gorge themselves on capital food, because they're like, what, they're being ridiculous. I mean, of course we have this much food. Everyone has this much food all the time. As the French would say, let them eat cake, right? But not my cake.
yeah,
Just let them buy their own cake and eat it. But that's not possible. Yeah,
yeah.
that's.
Well, it's interesting also with the Hunger
Mhm.
Games. Sorry, it's been a very long time for me, but Katniss and her male love interest, the other guy that competed, I don't remember his name.
PETA.
But there was kind of a connection with them prior when they were younger. When Katniss was starving and he had thrown her some bread. There's kind of a scene in that first movie. I don't know if you recall that or not. I don't know if it's in the books or not, but I haven't read the books. But it's just interesting bringing in the Hunger Games.
Yeah, totally. I'm taking care of some production things behind the scene real quick. Being
No worries.
doing.
That's also it's mentioned more in Franco because they were so poor. He does
Hmm.
mention a couple times throughout the story that, oh man, it's been so long since I've had meat. I thought that was just when we were talking about we were talking earlier about how some people eating meat's the norm, and others it's more of a scarcity. And with Franco's world, it was for him when he was younger, it was more of a scarcity, and um, definitely that was definitely more of a luxury.
Hmm. Definitely a luxury. So,
Yeah,
well, meat being a luxury is a common way to show poverty. Because it's kind of out of mind for a lot of Americans, because it's just so prevalent. We just have so much of it, and it's a blessing,
yeah,
but it's also something that we have to keep in check to maintain our humanity, sort of like to see the world the way other people see it. Um, and
well, something interesting.
yeah,
oh,
oh, go ahead.
I was just say it's just kind of and I'm sorry to keep kind of pulling away here, but
Totally fine.
a few years ago, um, what. with me, when I go get meat to grill out burgers or something like that, I usually, like most of us, just go to the supermarket. But there was a butcher shop in town, and I just went there, and that's the first time I'd ever gone to a butcher shop and got ground beef. And I looked at it, and it was kind of like brownish colored and a little slimy. And I
Hmm.
was like, I talked to the butcher. I was like, I'm really sorry, but like, is this is this okay? Like, what is?
Yeah.
He's like, oh yeah, that's that's what ground beef's supposed to look like. So it's just weird because you go to the grocery store and it's got that bright red color and all that, but his stuff was kind of brownish and yeah, it threw me off. But probably one of the best burgers I ever had when I came home and grilled it up. But
Yeah.
just a interesting little tidbit I wanted to share.
Yeah. No, and I also have a story from childhood like that. The first time I remember, the first time I ever made my own burgers, I way undercooked them because in my
Oh,
infinite wisdom, being I think 7 year old, maybe I was 8, something like that. With fresh patties, when you cook them, blood will come out of the patty with the grease, and you know that's part of the cooking process. But in my infinite wisdom, being young, I was like, oh, cool, it's making its own ketchup. and,
oh
and
gosh.
so I took it off the grill way early, and that was the
Oh,
nastiest burger I had ever eaten. Yeah, so
oh man, that's salmonella waiting to happen.
yeah, no, thankfully I survived. I didn't take a second bite, and I don't think I even swallowed that bite, so I was able to fend off whatever I might have gotten from that. That's a way you can kind of,
Yeah.
show your characters. Like, there's a really small, quick sort of blink and forget it kind of thing in my book where Thomas, after he becomes a knight, he's on another adventure, and he and his squire are there to, or are setting up camp, and he tells his squire, or he sort of shows his squire how to cook the game they had caught. Sort of keep rotating it until, and then he describes what a cooked piece of game will look like. And I promise I do describe it well in the book. I just can't think of it off the top of my head. But that sort of, it shows that Thomas, being an older boy, has more experience and more wisdom than his young squire, and so you can show differences in knowledge and differences in age. If I had my mom cook that burger for me, or my dad cooked that burger for me, that wouldn't have happened because they already had the wisdom of, oh, well, that's just blood coming out and exiting the burger. But I didn't have that
Yeah.
wisdom, and so you can show with your characters their level of wisdom or their lack thereof with how they handle food. When it comes to raw food, the classic example that I'm thinking of is Gaston with his. When I was a boy, I ate 2 dozen eggs to help me get large, and now that I'm grown, I eat 5 dozen eggs, and I'm roughly the size of a barge. 5 dozen eggs per morning. You're dead of salmonella in, I don't know, a week maybe. Like there's no way that guy's actually doing it, but it's sort of to show his ignorance, but also his like it sort of plays into the whole dumb brawly, or dumb like Brolic kind of character. And there's places for that in settings like, if you have an orc traveling with your fantasy setting party, an orc might just like find a bunny, like catch it with a net or a bow shot or something, and then just eat it like it's a piece of jerky or something, and just raw, and you could use that to totally like gross out the rest of your characters, and to have a few character moments, and to build on these characters, and to show the cultures and regions of your world in more depth. And so there's
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually I had an uncle. He's deceased now. But he was telling me one time a story. He said when he was a kid, they called them cannibal sandwiches. They would eat
hmm,
raw beef on bread, and they called it a cannibal sandwich. I'd never heard that before. I don't know, but he's like, yeah, back then we didn't worry about salmonella. I was like, okay,
okay,
that would have been probably the 50s or 60s, but
yeah. Well, it's
yeah,
just
that's what he was telling me.
It's just like, oh, when we were your age, we just drink water out of the hose, and I'm like, great, that's great for you, Uncle. I have a faucet at home
Hey,
now,
man.
though. Have
Yeah.
I don't. I'm not interested in raw fluoride. I for my fluoride filtered. Yeah, so there's a lot you can do there. Lots of funny stories to be told. And never underestimate the power of food in your stories. Even the Bible has several stories where food is a major player. Recently there's been a lot of things going on the internet.com, which there always is, of course. And some people have brought up the analogy of don't give up your birthright for a bowl of porridge. Because what a character like Esau did
Esau, yeah.
when he came home from the hunt and he was starved and sweaty and hungry and was, granted, he was manipulated by Jacob, but he still gave up what he had as a right of firstborn for immediate satisfaction. Like, would he or could he have probably made it to the tent and made his own bowl of porridge? Probably. He probably would have been fine. But he didn't want that. He wanted to just immediately take what he could get. And you know, you can play with that in your stories with, and it doesn't have to be food. It can be other temptations. Like the character who I won't spoil exactly like who they are or anything, but there's a character who goes into a cave with Thomas to confront a dragon who supposedly lives in that cave. And Thomas obviously is the main character, he kind of comes out on top, but this character ends up from his wounds later on dying from the complications of his wounds taken in the fight. But the fight only started because he felt a temptation. The um the works that Thomas had read, warning of the cave, said, "Touch not but that which for you came." And so the idea was they were only there to find a shard of the shield. That's all they came for. But there was all this gold just laying around, all this gold and treasures and rubies and diamonds and all these things laying around. And Thomas was conflicted because he was poor, right? That was kind of the main reason that someone would be tempted by this sort of thing. Like a single handful of all of this treasure could change his family's fortunes forever and totally revamp their lives. But he didn't. But his friend did. His friend took pockets full and tried to leave, and that's when the dragon confronted them, and the dragon ends up killing the character because of, so to speak, a bowl of porridge. So don't you know look at stories about food, and you don't have to end up being about food, but in reality, they can be allegories that you got from food. One of the most
Yeah, that's interesting. That scene. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say quickly, one of the most famous stories about food is Snow White. What's that story all about? Poison apple. Like
Hmm.
it's the temptation to eat the most delicious looking apple in the basket, and that's what she does. Is she eats it, and she is punished for it. So thankfully, someone else is able to come along and rescue her from that. But yeah, so there's ways to go about using food in your story that isn't strictly filling your character's stomach or preparing a ration. So, you had something you wanted to say?
Oh, I just say that scene you had said in your book about how they had to go in and they were supposed to just receive the shard, but they ended up somebody ended up stealing some gold as well. It was a little reminiscent of a scene in Pan's Labyrinth that had a similar feel to it. I don't know if you've ever read that story or watched the movie, but there was a similar scene that actually was surrounding food. The little girl goes in this I think it's like it's been a long time. I think it was in a different dimension or something like that. And anyway, she was supposed to go there, retrieve something, and leave, but then she saw the succulent food there, and she was kind of poor, didn't eat a lot, so she grabbed some food, and there was a monster that awakened and chased her. So it got me thinking of that scene you had mentioned. Another thing is, yeah, concerning the Bible, it's interesting the symbolism with food is, and I don't want to misquote the Bible here, so maybe you can correct me, but there was a scene with King David where I think it was early or maybe before he had actually officially taken reign or whatever. But he was out with his men, and he was just said, I would give anything to have a cup of water from my well, from the well in the town he grew up in." Because he just was real homesick and all that, and that was the kind of the first thing he thought about is getting a cup of water from the well nearby where he grew up. And here he was, king at that point, and that's all he could think about. And it's interesting, talking symbolism is, because again, I grew up in upstate New York, and we have New York style pizza up there.
Hmm.
And that's the only place I've ever had it. Now I live down south now, and there's places around here that say they make New York style pizza, but it ain't New York style pizza. And even then, I'll talk to other Yankees down here, and we all say the same thing. I'll even start to bring it up. They'll interrupt me half sentence, like, "Yeah, that's not New York style pizza." Um, it was interesting. I went after sometime after my parents died. I went back up to New York, and I hadn't been to that town. It was a town I grew up in since I was a kid, so it had been almost 20 years. And I went up there and I met up with one of my old buddies, and we went to the New York pizzeria. It was still open over there, and we had stuff. It tasted and smelled just as I remembered it, and it was the
Mm-hmm.
first time I'd had it in almost 20 years. Another thing is, I'm sorry, I'm taking over here, but
No, totally, it's fine.
I had, yeah, no, I had posted and you had commented on it. I was at a job site earlier this week, and they it just so happened they were doing like a chili cook off or something,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, "Hey, why don't you come have some chili with us?" I said, "Okay, you twisted my arm."
Okay.
But
Yep.
even then, I was in line to get some chili, and I remember thinking while I was in line, I was like, this is not going to be as good as my mom's chili. I was thinking that because she passed away. Oh gosh, how long ago was that? Maybe 14 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I had had her chili since then, and that's all I could think about when I was in line. I was like, it's probably be pretty good, but it's not gonna be as good as my mom's chili. And it wasn't, and it was really good, but it wasn't. It wasn't like what Mama made way back when.
Naturally, and I think it's important as writers and as creatives that we use these realities and weave them into our stories. I think a home cooked meal, which you bring up in Revo, is kind of something you just can't beat. Um, my my stepfather, the one who inspired my pen name, which if you didn't know, AP Timothy is a pen name, he would make these steak. I don't know what he'd call them, but like steak burritos almost. That he'd make like 40 at once and then just freeze them, and then we just microwave them or whatever to eat them. And I don't think I have ever or will ever have a burrito that attains that level of satisfaction. Like that was one of the best pieces of food I've ever had. And so you can take these realities that you experience as a person and use them in your writing. Use them in your storytelling, in your craft. Make
Oh
these
yeah,
characters
symbolism. There's
human,
a lot of yeah.
symbolism,
Hmm.
and humanity, because I think when it comes down to it, every story is a human story. Even if you're somebody like Tim, we love Mr. Timothy Robert. He's a great friend of the show, and he's written a trilogy now about anthropomorphized animals. But at the end of the day, if you're reading his book, it's a human story. Even if what's happening is he's taken some eccentricities with these animal characteristics and things at the heart of it, the emotions, the symbolism, and some of the elements or most of the elements are human elements, because who's writing it? A human. Who's reading it? A human. And so that's something that I've sort of preached from the rooftops almost since the show began, is make your stories human and people will enjoy them typically. And something that I've asked one of my editors a lot as they've been reading through the book is I've been asking, how did that feel? Did that feel human? Was that realistic? Did that were you able to read that in one smooth motion, or did you kind of like have to stop and cringe at something? And because I want this story to be one of humanity, and not in like a weird like liberal arts sort of way, but in a, well, I use the phrase, in a human way. And so there's a lot that we could go on. We could probably, you and I could probably just talk and yap about food and writing and all these things for probably a couple hours, but we are running short on time here. So naturally, as is tradition on this show, I want to give you the chance to talk about yourself a little bit more. And I want to ask if you could talk to that younger man who was first writing Revo, or even before when you had begun to write stories, even if those stories weren't books yet. What words of inspiration or words of advice would you give that young man?
I would say just don't be too hard on yourself. Have some confidence. That's I just remember being, for lack of a better word, scared when I had gotten towards the end of Revo, because I was really excited about it, but I was just like, but does it read good?
Hmm.
And I just remember I just like at that time I desperately wanted some outside validation. Like, oh, I gotta see if I can get somebody else to read this and then have them tell me it's good. Uh,
Yeah.
which you can get. I don't mean to downplay feedback. You can certainly get some good feedback if somebody says, hey, this part, which they did. A couple people said, hey, this part kind of read a little weird, or this part kind of glazed over something that they probably could have explained a little bit, or this part pulled me out a little bit. So that's valuable. But I was just real apprehensive about, was someone going to read this and just say this completely incoherent babble, or or what. But I wish, because that kind of did stall the process. I kind of sat on the story for a long time because I was nervous about somebody else reading it, and what would they think? Would they tell me it was just no good, or it was like, so, and because I was really excited about the story. Um, and I don't know what I would have done if I had just gotten, purely critical feedback. But like, once again, it can be valuable, but at that time, I think that probably would have, you know, discouraged me more than it should have. So that, I guess that would be my advice: is just, have confidence in your writing ability, and don't take criticism of certain parts of your story or certain elements of your story as you're a bad writer or this is a bad story. Just try to step back and say, hey, you know what? Do they have a point here? Like, hey, could this stand to have a little more detail explained, or have it worded slightly differently to make it a little more enjoyable of experience for a reader, or a little more realistic. With Franco, I had some people read the first draft of that, and it starts out when Franco is 10 years old. And some people kind of said, he doesn't really talk or act like a 10-year-old. Now, granted, fantasy story, you could take some liberties with that. But I read it again after that. And I was like, okay, you know what? I kind of see what they're saying. And I think I made some really good improvements based on that feedback. So I guess that would be my advice to my younger self: is you can receive critical feedback and still have confidence in your story and your writing ability.
Right. And I think it's important that we remember as creatives, speaking to my audience now, if you're listening to this and you're a younger creative, that's awesome. Keep writing. But criticism is how we grow as individuals, as writers. For example, in school, and I won't get political, don't worry, but there's been, over the last several decades, there's been a lot of deterioration in the education system. And part of that is this idea of no child left behind. No Child Left Behind is this idea where, okay, such and such happened in grade two and you failed your English. But that's okay because it's more important for you to stay with your social cohort. We're going to move you on to grade three. That's a failure to the students and also to the teachers, because how you grow as a student and how you grow as an individual is by is by failing and trying again. And to just ignore failure and to brush over it and to downplay it is not healthy. I don't think it's scary, like you just said, and I'm sure as you can attest to something that you've spent all that time on, all that effort on, and then it getting trashed on is scary prospect, but it's important to help you grow. I remember giving my first couple short stories to a few critique partners. They ripped them to shreds. But then when I reread the short stories, they were totally right. And I'm like, wow, thank you guys so much. I ended up thanking my critique partners rather than being angry at them for degrading my work. Um, so yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice is what you said. So don't be afraid of critiques. Good. For myself, it's the same as always. Just keep writing. And that's the advice I'll give any young author who asks me how to improve their craft. Keep writing, and get people to read it. Like you said, get people to read it and tell you what they think. Um, because that's a huge piece of the growing journey is getting relevant and good feedback. So keep writing out there. Um, and yeah, so go ahead and where can people find you? Where can people read Revo? And then are there pre-orders of Franco available yet?
Not quite yet. I just got the manuscript back from my editor with some suggestions and some changes, so I'm going to go through that probably this weekend or next week and do that. I might sit on it for a little bit, and I would like to maybe have maybe another beta reader read it over one more time, just to hey,
Hmm.
just make sure they catch something maybe that I missed, and maybe have the editor do one final proofread on it, and then from there work on a date. I'm also still working with the cover artist
Hmm.
on that. So yeah, I'll announce pre-orders on that, or at least release date on that pretty soon. Also, as a side note, if I can throw this out there, I'm actually working also with a voice artist to get Revo made into an audiobook. Actually, just signed a contract with this guy Andrew Goler, phenomenal voice, and yeah, he just got started on that. So that will hopefully be coming out maybe in April. Really excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
As far as where to find me, I'm probably most active on X. The username is _knight_writer, and that's knight spelled like King Arthur's knight, and then writer spelled as somebody who writes, not writer, writer.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm most active. My website, MatthewLinton.com. You can find links to all my socials there. Revo is available right now. It's still available wide, so most online retailers have it. Of course, Amazon and Barnes and Noble and whoever else your preferred retailer is. I also do sell it direct on my website for a little bit less than where you can get it at a retailer.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's just you go there. You can find me. You can find my book.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's I would encourage my listeners to go and do that. Go and buy Revo. Give it a read. That way you can get prepared and up to date for Franco when it comes out. For myself, I am losing daylight as we speak, and I don't have a camera light, so I will be quick about this. But you can find me right here on X at AB Timothy Author. You can find my website, which is abtimothy.com, where I post blogs. I've also been posting articles here on X and then transcribing them to my blog, so it's kind of a bit of a cross thing. You can follow me here for updates on the Kickstarter. Speaking of which, I have a Kickstarter for the Shards of Arthur Shield, which will be launching on March 1st, which will be about 2 weeks from the time of the airing of this episode, if you're not listening to it live. Go there on the Kickstarter, which is available in the show notes. Follow the Kickstarter that you can get updates as they come along and be notified when it goes live. There will be many reward tiers, many things to consider when it comes to pre-purchasing the book. This will be my sort of pre-order plan for you as a reader. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in seeing the completion of what I've done and what I've talked about here for the last several months, that's the best way to do it, I think. And with that, show has come to a close. And as you go about your week, remember, keep beacons lit.